Hello students, this is the last lecture. It's on Instructional Strategies, Book 2, Chapter 2. The objectives are to understand the process of developing instructional materials, so that's the planning stages. And then what we'll actually cover in the lecture is Bloom's taxonomy through the YouTube clip, discussing the different instructional approaches, and then applying it by looking through lesson plans to see if we can find some of those instructional strategies.
Important for us to understand. So remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, creating, less difficult to more difficult. And we use these not only when we're creating an individual lesson plan, but also an entire course or structure or classroom. You want to keep these things in mind. So there are lots of revised editions of Bloom's taxonomy. I was telling one of the groups during our conversation. So you might see this in different formats. The idea is the same though. You need to start out with basic knowledge and understanding before you can get to any application, synthesis, or creation. Okay? Now, we've broken this down traditionally as these three on the bottom, the base, being what we call lower order or lower level thinking, and the ones on the top being higher order or higher order thinking skills. Now, I would argue, especially from experience teaching with you guys, with college students, that applying, you could probably draw this in half. And some application could be considered higher order thinking, and some application on a more simplistic level could be considered lower. Okay? But others wouldn't agree with me with that. So as we look at lesson plans here in a second and talk about what goes into a lesson plan and why they're important, keep these things in mind. Okay? Your quiz questions that you all love so very, very much, where do they fall on here? Most of them. Apply. I would say most of them are application. There's a little bit of analysis that goes into a compare and contrast. What's the difference here? Things like that. And there are only a few remembering. So what I'm doing with those quiz questions is I'm trying to get you to higher order thinking skills, higher order knowledge in this class, not just spitting out the basic facts. Because you've got your book, right? You could pick it up and read it. And you can always find these pieces, right? So not only is this a good thing that we can use to create our lesson plans, but it's also a good tool when we think about challenge and where challenge is. And I know I harp on this whole challenge thing a lot, but using this will help you figure out where to challenge your students. It might be here if it's a new concept, or it might be up here. Right? So you've got to pick and choose and figure out where your students are and where you can apply the challenge. Okay? So, pushing forward, I want us to take a look at instructional strategies. So I have this for you, although I'm sure some of you have already printed it out. This is a great tool, right? Can I have you?
This chart on instructional strategies can be very helpful for you. Make sure you print it out or have it open as we continue the lecture.
Just a organizational tool to keep your three strategies and then the multiple methods that fall within those three strategies organized in your mind. Okay? So the strategies on this side, you have expository, hands-on or practice, and then you have the interactive or the collaborative. Those are more bigger picture umbrella type terms. And then we have specific methods that fall within each of the strategies. Okay? So lots of different methods for each of them. So starting with the first one, the expository, information is presented in more or less the same format that the students are expected to learn it in its final form. So I give you something, and then I want that something back. Exactly the way I gave it to you. So when you're reading your textbook, that would be an expository type of learning or form. You read it, and then you tell me what you've read. Definitions. Okay? I'm not expecting you to do anything with the information, to change it, to organize it, to evaluate it, to apply it, nothing. All I'm saying here is give it back to me. Okay? So if we look back here at our Bloom's where are many of our expository strategies going to fall? Remember it. Probably a little bit of understanding too. Now, in a textbook or in a lecture, we could do some application together. Okay, but it's not, it's usually an example that's in your book or something like that that we talk about or that you've read. So we tend to be on the lower side of our Bloom's taxonomy when we're looking at expository strategies. Now that's not to say that you can't produce higher order thinking skills with this method. You can, but we tend to see most of them falling with the lower skills. So some example methods, lectures and textbooks, those are the ones that you are probably most familiar with. Mastery learning, direct instruction. Computer-based instruction, online courses tend to be mostly expository in nature. And then online research that you're doing. So if you're going to look up an article or some kind of research that you're doing for a class, you're just gathering information and then presenting it back in its original form. Direct instruction is the one that I have highlighted because it's probably the most common. So just a few things about direct instruction to keep in mind. It should be, when it's done correctly, done in a series of steps or sequences. And so instead of just lecturing or conveying information, the instructor or teacher should start with a set of objectives. They should then review what those objectives are, so it's very clear for the student. Revisit old information that the class has learned. That would be the next piece. And then add on to or explain the new information and revisit it or practice it thereafter, summarize it. Okay? So it's not just dumping everything in an unorganized way. When done properly, direct instruction can be a really good way of conveying new information to your students. Thinking back on cognitive theory, why would we want to first revisit what we already know? Why do we want to first revisit what we already know before we present new information?
I want to activate the scheme.
Yeah, I want to activate the scheme, exactly. Perfect, Jessica. So with Piaget, we activate the scheme. With memory theory, we activate the scheme so that we can assimilate before we have to accommodate and build on something new, right? So that would be an important step. So you can see in all of these example methods that fall under the strategies, there's reasons why and how to do them effectively. So the next one is hands-on and practice activities. Information is presented in a hands-on way. Students actively do something with what they're learning. And so what's important in this definition is that knowledge here develops. Okay, here we're just giving knowledge and it comes back to us in the same way. This is when the knowledge is changing or developing within the student. They are working on it. They are doing something with it. Okay. So if we look back here to our hands-on, where might we fall in general in Bloom's taxonomy? Applying to create. I would even say maybe some understanding if the understanding helps you, if doing something helps you understand it. Definitely applying. And I think, yeah, all the way up to creating. You can have a hands-on activity that creates something new. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Bigger range of skills here in the hands-on practice or practice activities. So examples, discovery learning, any in-class activities that you might do with your students, computer simulations where they're actively involved, and then any type of homework where the student has to work on something and produce something for you can be considered hands-on. We don't have to think of homework like if I sent home math problems as being hands-on, but it actually is in that they're actively engaged in it. I like to think of the hands-on things that students and teachers do in the classroom. Okay? Things like science experiments, when we get up and we demonstrate a neural connection, or what we're going to do here in a minute looking at the lesson plans. Right? Those are all hands-on. Has anyone seen or remembered examples of discovery learning? There are some of you that did this Instructional Strategies ELA. Discovery learning? Yeah, Chance.
I don't know, I guess I don't know if it applies directly to what I did, but at Outdoor Lab, we used to do a thing called Think, Pair, Share. We'd make the kids, or they would have them pair up with a partner, and they'd have to, like, take a term that they already knew, find it, and then study it together, and then they have to, like, reteach the concept.
The other. I would put, I mean, it's active, but it might be more collaborative, although there is a little bit of overlap there because they're actively doing something. But I think the bigger piece with Think, Pair, Share is that it's collaborative in nature.
Okay.
And that's a lot of what you guys do with the YouTube clips. You think about these questions, you share it with each other, and then you represent or present it to us. With discovery learning, what's really cool and unique about it is that the students come to their own answer. So you can see how that's very different than direct instruction or the expository technique. They come to the answer. You did not give them the answer. So it's setting up a science experiment, for example. That's a very clear, good example, where they're going to arrive, if they do the steps in the experiment, they're going to arrive at the same conclusion and the correct conclusion, which is a scientific principle that you're trying to teach. And they have discovered it themselves. And the research shows that when the student generates the answer, they remember that information more so than if you just give it to them. Okay, they're putting the legwork in, they're making the discovery. So I would say not to discount any of these other ones, they're all great, but discovery learning is a really good example of a hands-on approach. Okay. The last one that we have here is interactive or collaborative. So information is presented within social interactions, exchanges of ideas, and either between the teacher and peers or peers between each other. And we do a ton of this in this class, right? So we talk with each other, we share our viewpoints, share our experiences, and that's how we build our understanding. All right. So teacher questions, class discussions, reciprocal teaching, cooperative learning, peer tutoring, and some technology-based collaboration, discussion board type of activities can be considered interactive and collaborative. Vygotsky would be down here if we thought about our cognitive theorists. Okay, so the one I have highlighted here is reciprocal teaching. It's exchanges of questions between the teacher and students. And it's most often done with our little ones during reading. So they'll be reading a story or a passage, and the teacher will stop and ask questions, trying to get to a deeper level of understanding. So it won't just be, what do you know? It'll be social perspective taking questions, like what do you think this character is thinking about? It could be prediction questions, what do you think is going to happen next? How would you react to this situation? And then the class as a whole will discuss those questions. And it goes back and forth in this way, questioning one another. That's reciprocal teaching. Okay? Another great example of just one method that would fall under the interactive or the collaborative. So you have this here in front of you to help you as we go look at our lesson plans here in just a minute. Now your book does go over how to plan or develop a lesson plan, and this is more for some of you who haven't seen lesson plans before. So the first thing that is important is actually down here. It's a guide, it's not a recipe. It looks like a recipe sometimes, the way that they're formatted. It'll have materials, it'll have step-by-step. But if you try to follow it like that, you will not be a successful teacher. Because you have to listen to your students, you have to see what's going on, what's working, what isn't working, and change things up based on that. But at least you have this guide in front of you, and you're able to be flexible, or what's a better word for flexible? Accommodating to your students' needs. Okay? So the teacher-constructed guide for a lesson, it identifies the goals, the materials, the strategies, any assessment methods that are needed. And it should follow, not all of them will follow this particular order or use these labels, but it should follow something very similar. We always want to identify what our objectives are, and we can use Bloom's taxonomy to help us with that. Do we want our students just to know the information? Do we want them to create the information? Okay. The materials, of course, the strategies. This is what we're going to be working on here. I'm going to have you guys look for the different instructional strategies that exist within these lesson plans. Okay, and then assessment methods, of course, are important. You want to know whether or not your students learned the information. And I really want you to think of assessment as a tool for knowing if your students have learned it, not as a means for grading. Right? The reason why we give assessments is to assess their understanding, to see if we've done our job and if they have done their job as a student. Okay, so you want that to be planned out in the lesson as well. So what we're going to do is take a look at lesson plans. I'm going to have you guys get into your groups based on your content domains. I know that was 3 weeks ago, but I'm hoping you can remember who you were working with. It's either reading, writing, science, or math. So if you don't remember the people, at least you might remember the area of study that you focused on. I think we had reading up here, writing, science and math, and then, what?
We were reading.
We were reading.
Okay, sorry, reading,
Math right here.
math,
Now.
reading, math, writing, science. Awesome. Great. Sets are to the sides. If you were not here that day, please join a content domain that you're interested in. So, what I'm going to do before we break up is give you lesson plans. Please don't write on these because I'm going to reuse them to try to save trees. I'm also going to give you the assignment sheet, so what you're supposed to be working on. Pick one person to record the information. This is going to go on Blackboard just like we did with content domains so that you can look at each other's work. Now on here, this is what I have you doing. I want you to identify, it says at least 4, shoot for 4. If you don't get there, some of these lesson plans are smaller than others, that's okay. I'll probably just end time before you get to 4, but just keep working towards that. And then you should have at least one method from each of the 3 overall strategies. So what you'll do is you'll say, coming back to our instructional strategies, you'll say, okay, this lesson plan has homework, which is part of the hands-on practice strategy. So you're identifying the method and the strategy. And then providing a couple suggestions here. Number 3 is how this method could be implemented to promote student learning. So why this lesson plan has these methods based on cognitive theory, based on what we've been working on all semester. Sound good? All right, so go ahead and break up into your groups.
This is the group work that the students are doing. I've given out lesson plans based on the content domains from a couple weeks ago. In the groups, they have to identify the different strategies that exist in the lesson plan. They want to find what the example is and then explain if it's effective or not effective. Now you're going to hear class discussion based on this group work.
Find, like, in all of the breakdowns of the plan itself, that they went between expository, interactive, collaborative, and then hands-on. So we could kind of
Follow that
in
pattern.
that order too.
Sure.
So it seemed like they explain it. I'm going to put stuff up on the board, and then we have them get together and collaborate, discuss their ideas, and then give them an assignment to do.
Cool. Yeah. Awesome. Sounds good. So what do you think would happen if they got into groups and all of a sudden they didn't understand something? What should the teacher do in that
You would
case?
just regroup the whole class together and kind of go over it again, maybe in more detail or break it down a little bit more, and then have them again break up into their separate groups.
Yep, so he might pull back into this expository method so that the students can be successful in the hands-on or the collaborative. Yeah. So remember, it's a guide, it's not a recipe. You might notice that something's not working, that you have outlined this step-by-step beautiful lesson plan that you worked so hard on. And if you're going to be teachers, you make these and you're just so proud of them. And then if something doesn't work, or you've got to change everything, or whatever, and that's just part of it. Okay. All right, that's science. How about math? My second favorite.
It was interesting because obviously mathematics, science would be another one too that you would automatically think, okay, this is expository, it's straight up math. Science might get a little bit more hands-on, but math is less hands-on typically.
Someone's got to explain it to me.
That's right. And so in the expository, there was almost an assumed expository piece because this teacher is taking them on a journey where they're learning hands, they're using their hands and to music, learning geometrical shapes and everything else. There's an understood expository that they already have this previous knowledge of what these geometric shapes are and what the angles are. So we focused on the hands-on and practice activities, which was the
making of the shapes of the
bulk
hands.
of it, yeah. There was less interactive and collaborative because it was more teacher-driven. The kids were less of their opinion or their creativity as much as it was repeating and mimicking shapes that they saw in a video or to music. Some of the things that we talked about that reinforced, and I want to remember what the third question was, provided these two suggestions, how this method could be implemented to promote student learning. Two of the aspects, they were doing angles to music and to a video. And they incorporated two different areas where you have your right brain thinking, where you're thinking analytically, math. This kind of tied over to the left brain where they were doing the music, doing these symbols and doing lyrics to this music, which tied it into the left brain. But then they also started doing the shapes of the angles and everything else with their hands, would tie it into muscle memory.
Yeah.
So really fascinating how they tied all of those in to really scaffold and structure reinforce their understanding of geometric
Great, yeah, multiple
definitions and
methods
shapes.
to
Yeah.
get across the same information, different modalities.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the repetition there.
Yeah.
Great. All right, how about my writing group? Yeah, what'd you come up with?
I think one of our favorites was the hands-on and practice one.
Okay.
It was a window box where you had a box on the window with like sticky tape. And they look through the box and choose an item that they want to write about, and then they create a poem of some kind. Didn't really have any structure, you could just choose a poem. And it's really
So definitely hands-on.
Yeah, definitely hands-on.
Yeah?
And it's also discovery learning, we think.
Sure,
It's
because
got-
they're coming to their own answer, generating their own information.
Yeah, they're using interacting with the environment as well.
Sure.
So that's a good one.
Why would that be important? I'm going to put you guys on the spot a little bit when we think about our motivation chapter.
Because it's something they want to do.
Their
not what
choice.
They have to.
Yeah, and what was that called when it's their choice? It's intrinsic motivation, sure, so that there's an internal drive, but it's one of those human factors. Self. That's the feeling competent. What's the other one? Determinism. Yeah, determination, self-determination. Right? I feel like I have some control, some choice over what I'm doing. So they look through this box, they can choose. Yeah, awesome. All right, last one in the back, reading. What did you guys find? What did you talk about?
Well, we found that our reading lesson plan had pretty much an even mixture of all strategies.
Cool.
I guess it started off with interactive and collaborative. You know, there were some teacher questions about just trying to pull some knowledge that the kids have, prior knowledge, before introducing the book. And then reading a book to them, doing the expository, and then asking questions of setting, characters. What else?
And then it was a lot of hands-on and practice because they had them taking the information that they had learned from the book and creating characters from the book with like markers and the main character's a fish, so making fish with art materials, and then recapping to the class their story and their fish. And they were doing this in groups. And
How old were these guys?
It's
Young, right?
Kindergarten.
kindergarten.
K through 3.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there was a lot of that hands-on, interactive, in-class activities,
Good.
opportunities for them to learn from each other and like make choices as well, like on how they wanted their fish to look and how they wanted their story to go.
Nice. Awesome. All right. Fantastic job. So the purpose of this was first off to give you some exposure to lesson plans if you haven't had that before, and then also to work on identifying some of these strategies and the methods. So what we did right here, what strategy is it? Interactive and collaborative. Yeah, sure. And I would also say hands-on. In the interactive and collaborative, what method might it be?
Teacher questions or
Class discussion.
Yep, class discussion, and I'm definitely asking you some questions.
Would it not
And
be
cooperative learning too.
Maybe a little bit of peer tutoring.
I think some
Yeah.
too.
Yeah,
Or like
the back and
asking
forth, yeah. It would be more, this is more, if there's a set, like, a few questions to ask. And then on the hands-on practice, what were we doing?
Class activity.
It is an in-class activity, yep.
And it's well on computer simulation.
There's a little bit of application, yep.
There's a little bit of discovery. Like,
Yeah, you are picking these out. You are discovering in the lesson plan where these things are. Yeah, awesome. All right, so why don't we get back in our rows? We have 5 minutes left. I have some concluding remarks. Bring up the lesson plans and then the one that you would like me to scan into Blackboard. You don't.
It answers you one, but I don't think it's
All right, I will scan those into Blackboard so that you have them to refer to, and you can check out some of the other work that the content domains looked at. I'm also going to scan in the lesson plans, so you have those as a tool for you as well. So, to kind of wrap up, to bring everything to somewhat of closure before our final opportunity. There are just a few take-home messages from the entire semester that I want to reiterate to you. So I'm just going to cover each one very briefly. We've spent a lot of time on these, so they should be familiar to you, right? One of them is to encourage social interaction related to classroom subject matter or content. Not everybody or every teacher is going to find this to be their chosen method. It needs to be authentic to you. But I find for myself and my classes, social interaction is huge. You guys talking to your peers, and we started it the day you came in and we finished it today, right? Interacting with one another and interacting with me to learn the information. Providing structure that guides students' learning and behavior. Scaffolding is important here. Building up from what we did with Bloom's, from basic understanding to creation of ideas, right? A lot of structure and a lot of organization goes a long way. Facilitate cognitive processing. So I'm just tapping into the information processing theory here. So you've got to get your students' attention. Think about the processes of working memory. Think about long-term memory. And then supporting mastery of fundamentals, including proficiency in basic knowledge and skills, providing a foundation for more advanced learning. This is Piaget, right? We want to build the basic schemes that you can then build onto or create new schemes from. And the last piece is challenge. So we've already talked about this today, but providing that challenge, it's essential for cognitive development. If your students aren't uncomfortable or feeling challenged, they're not going to learn anything. So you really got to raise the bar. And push them towards that. The organization and the structure will allow you to do that. I hope that you guys consider teaching in the future, and if you aren't considering teaching, then use this in all of your other classes as a student, because this will help you as you learn information as well. Okay.
Here's the summary from this lecture, what we covered and what we didn't cover. The importance of planning and working through an actual lesson plan was something we did not cover, even though we did look at them in groups. We did look at Bloom's taxonomy, and we worked through that chart explaining the different instructional strategies.